Picture this. You buy your dream lakefront home, complete with your own private lake and boat dock. Life is perfect until the HOA Karen decides your boat is unsightly and demands you remove it immediately. Here's where it gets interesting. She had no idea I actually owned the lake and her precious weekend fishing club. They'd been trespassing on my property for 15 years. What happened next was the most spectacular HOA meltdown in neighborhood history. Karen went from threatening me with legal action to watching her entire fishing empire crumble overnight. The woman who measured grass with rulers and timed garbage pickup to the minute was about to learn a lesson in property law she'd never forget. This story has everything: entitled neighbors, legal nuclear options, and the kind of revenge so perfectly justified it should be taught in law school. Buckle up, because Karen's about to discover what happens when you pick a fight with someone who actually read their deed. If you've ever wanted to see an HOA tyrant get absolutely demolished by their own arrogance, this is your story. And if you've survived your own HOA nightmare, drop your war stories in the comments. Some of you have been through battles that would make military strategists weep. I read every single comment and reply to the best ones. I never thought owning a home in a peaceful lakeside neighborhood would lead me into one of the most bizarre conflicts of my life. Like most people, I imagined living by the water would mean quiet weekends, friendly neighbors, and the kind of relaxation you can only get when you watch the sun setting over the rippling lake. But as anyone who has ever dealt with an HOA knows, peace and control rarely mix. When I first bought my property, it wasn't just the house that drew me in. What sold me was the lake itself. I had done my homework, and unlike most houses in HOA communities, mine came with a piece of land and the legal deed to the lake. The water was technically private property. That detail would later become very important, though at the time I didn't think much of it. I just knew I had exclusive rights to use it, so naturally, I kept a boat there. It wasn't some massive yacht or anything flashy, just a sturdy fishing boat, tied to my small dock. I loved taking it out early in the morning when the mist still hovered above the water, or late in the evening when everything turned golden. It was my personal escape, and one of the main reasons I had bought the property in the first place. But, as you probably guessed, not everyone was happy with that. The HOA in my neighborhood had a reputation for being strict. They were the kind of group that sent warnings if your grass grew an inch too tall, or if your garbage bin wasn't rolled back to its exact spot by sundown. And leading them was a woman I'll call Karen, because frankly, she fit the role perfectly. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, always patrolling, always watching, always ready to enforce the rules. Karen had this habit of power walking around the community every morning at exactly 7 a.m., clipboard in hand, looking for violations. She'd measure lawn heights with a ruler, check mailbox alignments with a level, and photograph anything that didn't meet her standards. Neighbors would literally peek through their curtains, waiting for her to pass before stepping outside. She had turned our peaceful community into a surveillance state. At first, I managed to avoid most of her drama. My lawn was tidy, my house was well kept, and I never gave her a reason to knock on my door. But eventually, she found one. One afternoon, I received a letter from the HOA. It was neatly folded, printed in formal language, and dripping with authority. It said my boat was in violation of community guidelines and needed to be removed immediately. If I failed to comply, I would face fines and potential legal action. I remember sitting there with the letter in my hand, blinking at the words, almost laughing. They were ordering me to move my boat, the boat that was tied to my own dock, sitting on my own lake. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe they didn't realize I actually owned the water. Surely, once I explained, this whole thing would go away. But that was wishful thinking. A few days later, Karen herself marched up to my front porch. Her arms were crossed, her jaw tight, and she spoke like she was addressing a child caught misbehaving. She told me the boat was unsightly and against HOA regulations. According to her, it ruined the uniform appearance of the community. Uniform appearance? I asked, gesturing toward the lake. It's a fishing boat on water. What's more natural than that? Karen's face reddened. The HOA covenant clearly states that all exterior modifications and additions must be approved by the architectural committee. Your boat was never approved. I calmly explained that the lake wasn't HOA property. I showed her the deed, clear as day. The property line extended well into the water, making it unquestionably mine. But Karen wasn't interested. She waved it off, saying the rules were the rules, and if I didn't comply, she'd take further action. I don't care what some old piece of paper says, she snapped. This is a community, and we all follow the same rules. No exceptions. That was when I realized this wasn't about the boat. It wasn't about rules or appearances. It was about control. Karen didn't like the idea that someone in her neighborhood had something she couldn't regulate. She was determined to bend me into submission. Over the next few weeks, the letters escalated. First it was warnings, then came threats of fines. $50 per day until the boat was removed. Then came threats of legal involvement and liens against my property. Each one was more aggressive than the last. Karen even started taking photos of my boat from different angles, as if she was building a case. The situation became absurd. She began timing my boat usage, documenting when I took it out and for how long. She complained to neighbors that the sound of my motor was disturbing the peace at 6 a.m., even though the community allowed lawnmowers and leaf blowers at the same time. She tried to rally support by claiming my boat was a safety hazard and an environmental concern. But while they were busy trying to intimidate me, I was busy preparing my own plan. You see, what the HOA didn't realize was that my ownership of the lake came with more than just boating rights. It came with full control over who could access the water, and as it turned out, the HOA had been using the lake for years. They had an entire fishing club that met every weekend, casting their lines, holding tournaments, even inviting people from outside the neighborhood to join in. The irony was delicious. Every Saturday morning, I watched from my window as Karen herself would arrive with her fishing gear, setting up her chair on what she thought was community property. The fishing club had become the neighborhood's pride and joy, with organized tournaments, prizes, and even a small clubhouse built near the water's edge. Technically, they had no right to be there at all, but I had never minded, because it didn't affect me. I wasn't looking to start fights. That all changed the moment they tried to push me around, so I made a decision. If they wanted to play hardball, I would show them exactly who held the power. I contacted my lawyer and had him draft a formal notice. It stated clearly that the lake was private property, owned solely by me, and that all unauthorized use of it must stop immediately. Anyone found fishing, boating, or otherwise using the lake without permission would be considered trespassing. The letter was airtight, backed by property law, and signed with authority. Then, I had copies delivered to every member of the HOA board, including Karen. The reaction was explosive. My phone started ringing within hours. Neighbors who had never spoken to me before were suddenly very interested in working things out. The HOA president, a mild-mannered retiree named Bob, showed up at my door, looking mortified. "Surely we can come to some arrangement," he pleaded. "The fishing club has been meeting for 15 years. It's brought the community together." I remained polite but firm. "I never had a problem with the fishing club until you decided to have a problem with my boat. You can't have it both ways." At the next HOA meeting, which I attended just to watch the fireworks, Karen stood up, red-faced and furious. She ranted about how I was being unreasonable and selfish. She tried to convince the other members that the lake somehow belonged to the community through some kind of implied easement or historical usage rights. "He's holding our entire community hostage over one little boat," she shrieked, but when I calmly presented the deed, there was no denying the truth. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them had been part of the fishing club for decades. They knew what this meant. Their weekend hobby had just been shut down, permanently. The meeting devolved into chaos. Longtime members turned on Karen, realizing her crusade against my boat had cost them something they truly valued. Accusations flew about her authoritarian management style and her tendency to pick fights over nothing. Within a week, I posted clear private property, no trespassing signs along the edges of the lake. The fishing club was officially evicted. Their tournaments ended. Their gatherings stopped. The small clubhouse sat empty and forlorn. The water, once busy with neighborhood activity, became still and quiet, reserved solely for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The HOA had started this battle by demanding I move my boat. In the end, their stubbornness cost them far more. They didn't just fail to remove my boat. They lost access to the entire lake. Karen, of course, tried to save face. She muttered about taking me to court and fighting this injustice, but everyone knew it was just bluster. The deed was unshakable. There was nothing she could do. And slowly, even her own allies started pulling away, realizing she had dragged them into a fight they could never win. The fallout was swift and decisive. Within 2 months, Karen was voted out as HOA president in an emergency election. The new board immediately reached out to me, hoping to negotiate lake access in exchange for dropping all boat-related complaints, but I had learned my lesson about giving people an inch. The lake access and my boat are separate issues, I told them. You made that clear when you tried to force me to remove it. For me, life went back to normal. Better than normal, actually. The lake was peaceful again. No more crowds, no more tournaments, no more drama. Just me, my boat, and the quiet water. Sometimes I felt a little guilty watching neighbors longingly stare at the water they could no longer access, but then I remembered how quickly they had supported Karen's harassment campaign. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at the irony. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission. Instead, they ended up exposing their own weakness. They underestimated me, and more importantly, they underestimated the power of ownership. The lesson here is simple. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting what's yours. It's about reminding people that rules don't give them the right to control everything. And when someone tries to push you around, the best response is to push back with the truth. In the end, Karen's obsession with regulations backfired spectacularly. She wanted me to move my boat, but all she managed to do was move her fishing club permanently off my lake. And every time I sit out there now, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I think about how close I came to giving in. If I had rolled over, if I had let them push me, I would have lost one of the greatest joys of my home. Instead, I stood firm, and that made all the difference. So yes, my boat is still right where it belongs, and the lake, it's mine, through and through.